Everyone, I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'm going to talk about object-oriented programming. As you know that Apex is an object-oriented programming language, right? So if you wanted to work with Apex, you need to know the concept behind object-oriented programming, right? So the first thing first, you should have an org by now, register for an org, right? If you haven't done so, please do so because it's very important you do hands-on. And I've registered for my org. As you can see, I've logged into my org. So let's dive in. Okay, the first thing first, let's go to the developer console. Okay, so today we're going to do a little bit different. Okay, so if you remember in my previous episode, I used to go to developer console, then I used to go to debug, execute anonymous window. I'm not going to do that today because it's a little bit different, right? Because we're going to talk about object-oriented programming. So why do we talk about object-oriented programming, right? Because most of the programming languages out there, right, like Java, C#, Delphi, Python, they're object-oriented, right? And they're very efficient language like Apex, right? There are some languages which are not object-oriented, like F#, that's a functional, Haskell, this kind of things. But we don't want to get into that, right? Okay. So the first thing you will have to know about classes, right? Classes are like a blueprint using which you create an object, okay? So if that sounds a little bit wacky or a little bit complex, let me explain to you, giving an example, right? Think about a car class, right? Car. You drive a car, right? So think about the properties of a car, right? Car has a name, car has a model, right? Could be any model number, and car has four tires, right? And it can be 2 doors or 4 doors, right? And it can be hatchback or sedan, right? Okay, and the car can be self-driving or it's a manual driving, right? Where a user drives, okay? So these are the functionality of the car. Driving is a functionality, okay, because the car performs an action. It's right, and other properties. What I mentioned, there are properties like name, model number, number of doors, right? So this is a blueprint of a car, right? A generic car, okay. So this is called a class, right? Class. Let's say think about a class as a general. When you think about a car, right, the first thing that comes in your brain is a car, irrespective of the model number or the brand, right? A car, if you know, it could be 2 door, or it could be 4 door, right? So, so car is a class, okay, and the properties of the car, like the name, model number, number of doors, right, and the functionality car can perform, which we call it as a method, that is a driving, okay. Could be self-driving, could be auto-driving, but this is something, that's the functionality of a car, right? Car drives, right? Otherwise, what's the point of having a car, you know, if you wanted to keep that in a museum, right? Okay, so that's a car example, okay? So that's a class. Now, what is an object, right? It's an instance of a class, okay? So what I mean by that, a car could be a BMW, okay? Car could be Audi, car could be Mazda, car could be Toyota, car could be Mitsubishi, could be anything, right? So these are an instance of a car class, right? So Mazda, for instance, right? Mazda has a name, right? Which is Mazda, right? It has a model number, whatever Mazda model number, right? And Mazda could be, you know, 2 doors or 4 doors, right? The properties, and Mazda drives, right? You can drive a Mazda car. Mostly Mazda for now is a manual driving, right? I mean, user has to drive. It's not a self-driving. I'm not sure if Mazda is working on it, but that's besides the point. The same goes with another object. Let's say you're talking about a BMW, right? BMW M series, sorry, 3 series, 5 series, right? So in BMW, you have the same, right? You have name, you have the model number, right? And you have 2 doors or 4 doors, whatever, right? And then the functionality of BMW, it drives, right? So it is an instance of a class, car, right? Car is a blueprint, right? Which is applicable to every car in the market, okay? So you can't create an instance of an aeroplane using a car class because you can't say a Boeing is an instance of a car, which doesn't make sense because plane and car are both different things, right? So anything to do with the car, right? It's like a blueprint. You create a blueprint of a car and then you create an object out of it. That's pretty much the concept of object-oriented. And when you talk about driving, right? You don't have to know, how the, car engine works or how the other stuff inside the car works. You just push the pedal, or if it's automatic or manual driving, you change. If it's a manual driving, you change the gear, right? Or you have to change it manually, right? So that's all functionality you need to know, right? You don't have to know the complex stuff that's going inside a car. So that's what the property of a class, that it hides the complexity, right? So when you say object, right, that object, car or BMW, it gives you functionality to say drive. So, whoever uses that BMW can drive it irrespective of the underlying details of a class. That's what called, it's to hide the complexity, okay? Use the class as a black box, okay? I'll explain to you if it all looks hazy and complicated. I'll explain to you, over the course of time. But this is a general explanation, right? Class is a blueprint and you derive an object out of it. Objects are instances of a class, okay? Right, now, so we're gonna create a class, okay? So the way to do that using the developer console, okay, you go to file here, okay, go to new. You see we have an option called Apex class. You create an Apex class. You create a name, let's say we're gonna talk about car. Give a meaningful name, okay? So car class, okay? Right. So we're gonna, okay. All right, now, so you might be thinking what it is, the public class. So this is how developer console does. It gives you a default skeleton. So we have this public, right? These are access specifier, right? So access modifier, you can say we have public, we have private, we have global, we have protected, right? So if you wanted to use your class outside the namespace, outside this application, then you use global, but it's not advisable to use the global. So you can also make this as global, okay, right? So let's talk about the access specifier, okay? So we have, like I said, we have global, okay? Right, we have public, okay? We have private, we have protected, okay? Right, now, global, as I explained, right? If you wanted to use the class outside the namespace, you use the global. If you wanted to use the class within the namespace, then you use the public. If you can't access it outside the namespace if you use public, okay? Private means that you can only use within the class, okay? And protected if you inherit a class. We're gonna talk about protected later. Don't worry about it now, okay? So what we're gonna do, as I explained, right, car, right, is a blueprint, right? Car have model, okay? So if you remember, I talked about how to declare a variable, right, in the first episode. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. We're gonna declare a variable, okay? Variable of type string. So normally we do string, okay? Name, okay, right? So so if you don't want this name, right, to be accessible, right? If you don't want the name to be accessible outside the class, right, or using an object, then you should put it as private. In other words, if you create an object out of this class, right, you can have access to the method like which I'm going to show you how to do that. But if you do not want an object to fiddle with this thing, right, the name, the value of the name, then you should make it private. If you make it public, then you can access bmw.name. You can make it to Audi, which doesn't make sense, right? So I'll show you what I meant by that. Let's keep it private, okay? Let's say private. Then we need to have the model number, which is a string. You can put model number, okay? And then we have to the number of doors, right? So number of doors, which is, if you remember the data type, integer, you can't be string, okay? So number of door, okay? Right, now we need to create a method. Method is like an action, right? A class performs an action what kind of action the class should perform, right? Obviously, in this case, it's called driving, okay? So let me expand this, okay? So you're gonna do, but we need to expose the method to an object, right? Because obviously, if you give someone a car, right, a BMW, the person should be able to drive, right? Right? Think about a scenario, right? You buy a car, okay, right, from a showroom or from a car dealership, wherever it is, right? What do you expect when you buy a car? You know, you can do a test drive, right? So test drive means you could able to drive, right? But no one expects you to change the name of the car from BMW to something else. No one expects you to change the model of the car. You can't do that. If you do that, you will not be covered under the warranty, right? So we don't want an object to fiddling with it. But obviously, as a user, you should be able to drive a car. So that means you should have an access to the method which is called drive. Okay. So the same concept is applicable here. So in this case, we put public, because if you put private, it's just like you create an object, right? You have a car, but you can't do anything with the car. You can't change the name. You can't change the model number. You don't have access to the number of doors. Obviously, you can't change the number of doors, right? I mean, that means you're modifying the design of a car, and which will kill the warranty straight away, right? So at least you should be able to drive, okay? So you can say drive, right? I'm just putting a dummy method here, okay? This is how you write a method, okay? So void means it returns nothing, right? If you want the method to return to you something, could be a string, could be an integer, then you should not be putting void, okay? We'll talk about that in detail in our next episode, but for now, when you put a void, means this method will not return a value, okay? So it is not returning. You can't put return because there's nothing it's returning behind. Okay, I'm just gonna print it, right? You can do, now you might ask, okay, but this is printing, right? It is printing. You can, but it's not returning it, right? You can't return a value. I'll explain to you if it's confusing. Okay, for now, you can say driver, right? So this is our class, okay? Now, for now, okay, let me save it, okay? Just Control S, it will save it, okay? So it's saved. Now we have a class created, okay? Now let's create an instance, right? Obviously, you have a car as a blueprint, but obviously, you can't drive a generic car, right? Someone will give you a blueprint, right? You can't do anything about it unless you're an automobile engineer, right? Till then, you can't do pretty much anything. You can't manufacture a car. If you're a technician who knows how to manufacture a car, use the blueprint. So you're gonna use this blueprint, okay? And let's say we're gonna deal with BMW, okay? So we go to debug, the same place, anonymous window, because we're gonna test it out, okay? Now we're gonna say car class, okay? You type the name of the car, okay? We're gonna create an object now. Watch how to create an object, okay? Write the name of a car. This is like a data type, remember? Data type, variable name, okay? So variable name, let's say Audi, okay? But in this case, if you remember, I talked about list, when a list of string equals to new list. If you haven't watched, please watch my collection video. So you're gonna say new, okay? Because you have to create an instance of this class. So object needs a memory. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. So how to do that? Using a keyword called new, okay? And then you copy this. I understand that it's a little bit overwhelming if you have never programmed in object-oriented before, but stay with me. I try to explain to you in a very simple way, okay? So that's why I gave you car example, because everyone can relate to car, right? You know, even if you don't have car, but you can understand what car is about, right? Okay, rather than giving you an example of a space shuttle or something, which, you know, most of the people can't even relate, right? Or something else, okay? So car is a very common example. It's a very easy way, you know, to explain. Most of the textbooks, they talk about car or other stuff, right? So, okay, so now we have an Audi, okay? Now I have Audi with me in my hand, okay? Now, sorry about that if you hear that bike. Yeah, at times, you know, do hear this on noise. My apologies for that. Okay, so I have an Audi, okay? So what can I do with the Audi? I can drive, right? Right? I can drive. But how do I know it's an Audi car or not? Okay, let's say if I drive, okay? Can I drive? Audi? Yeah, obviously, okay? This is how you do. All right, so you drive, okay? It's driving, okay? Now you must be thinking, what am I doing here, right? What is this dot drive? So if you wanted to access any method or any property, right, like name, model number, you choose object name dot, right? And so the difference is, okay, let me make this as public because I can't access. Okay, let me say public, okay? Let it save, okay? So, right, so now this is a method, okay? Now, accessing a property or the member, right? This is, you can call it as a property or a member of a class is a little bit different to, accessing is similar, but the way you define it is a little bit different, okay? So let's say I want to access a name, okay? Dot name, right? Now, here you won't put this because it is not a method, right? It's not like, remember one thing, if it's not an action, right, you will not be putting this brackets here, right? Because it's not doing an action. Name is not an action, okay? It's a noun, right? So you assign the value for name to, let's say, I would say Audi, okay? So it will work, no problem whatsoever, okay? Because I have made the access of name as public, okay? So let me run it. It will work perfectly fine, right? No problem. But can you access model number? Can you access the model number? Think about it. I explained to you, when you declare something private, it can't access beyond the class, okay? So can you access the model number? Think about it. So let me try it, okay? You say model number equals to whatever you can put, right? Whatever. Okay. Or the A4 or whatever, A5 or, you see? This variable is not visible, okay? Because it is a private. So it is telling you, look, I can't give access to this model number because it's private and I can't expose it. So, right? So, but now, do you think, now you must be thinking, oh, so if I wanted to, pass the model number, let's make it public, right? Because obviously I wanted to change the model number, right? This is the best way to do it. No, absolutely not. It's not the best way to do it. Because it's not a good practice to make a variable public, right? Unless it's really, really, really important, okay? So, I mean, I don't see a use case of making public very rare scenario. So how do you, so let's say I wanted to change it back to private, okay? I want to change it back to private again. But now my requirement is I still want to update name, model number, and number of doors. But I don't want to make it public. Can you do it? That's a question. So this won't work because it's all private. Can you actually make, can you pass the value to name, model number, and number of doors? Because I wanted to say, this is Audi A4, 4 doors, model number A4, and this is the name of the car Audi, okay? So can I pass the value to name, model number, and number of doors under current scenario, under this current design? In other words, look at the class. Think about it for a second, pause the video and think about it. I have declared the variable name, model number as private, okay? It's nowhere, you can't access it using Audi.name, model number. So, and I don't want it to make it public, right? So what's the best way, if you ask? So that's where the constructors comes in the picture, okay? So constructors, like constructor, right? When you say new class, right? This is a constructor, it's calling, okay? So the constructor is a piece of a code which gets called first when you create an object, okay? I'll explain to you what I meant by that. Don't get confused. Public constructor has a very different syntax. So you have to define a constructor exactly the name of a similar to the name of a class. So in this case, okay, Now this is a method, but very different. This is constructor. You won't use any void like we do here or anything else, okay? So now I pass it, okay? Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pass string name, just put it name, and it's gonna put string model number, and I'm gonna put a integer, a number of door, okay? Let me pause this, okay? Now we're gonna put name equals to, right? And model number equals to, oh sorry, I just want to put a, just wanted to make it, I explain to you what I'm trying to do, okay? Just give me a second here. Right, so what I've done right now, okay, so I have, let us say, I have created a constructor, right? Constructor means this is the line of a code which get executed when you create an object, okay? So when you create an object, what I'm trying to do here is that I'm passing 3 values, okay? So in this case, right, come here to the screen, let me explain. So here, right, here I'm not passing any value under this, okay? This is a constructor code. When you run this code, that's how the constructor codes get called, okay? So when you run this part of a code, piece of a code, okay? So you're telling, okay, create an audio object, okay? But I'm not passing anything to the constructor. Car will not take anything. It just create an instance of a car class without accepting anything, and here you are, okay? Now, let me run this to see what happens, okay? You can't run it because now in Apex, right, when you declare, you define a constructor here. When you define a constructor, okay, so you are telling to the Apex, look, I don't want a default constructor. I want a constructor which I defined, okay? So now when you define your own constructor, right, you lost the power to access this one, okay? So if you wanted to do this, you have to specifically create a new constructor, which we don't get into it now, okay? So remember this, right? If you want to create an object and pass different values, okay, to the constructor, then you have to define your own constructor, which like I did. So this is a constructor code. So this is a constructor code, and I have changed the constructor from a default to the way I want it because I want to pass the 3 values of the variable to my private variables, right? Because I can't access the private variables. Audio.name will not work because it's hidden, right? The visibility is hidden, right? So the way to pass the value now is through here, okay? Just I know that it's a little bit confusing because when I started learning object-oriented way long time ago, it used to be confusing for me as well, okay? So you're not the only one. So, okay, now will it work? Okay. Right? So you see the code works. Now, let me show you one more thing. Now, how can I confirm that whether the name, model number, and number of doors actually getting the value what I passed? What I meant by that? How do I know that the name of the car is OD and the model number is A4 and the number of doors is 4? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna create another method, okay, called, this is how you create a method, public void, because I'm not returning anything. You can give any name you want, right? It's just like giving a variable name, but just can give any name you want, right? It's not fixed. It's not a fixed keyword. It's up to you what you want to give here, right? But make sure that it should make sense, right? Okay, so I want to do display info, okay? This is my name, and I could give whatever. You know, I can put even, say, you know, Salesforce, display Salesforce if I want. I can put that, right? It doesn't matter because it's a method I've defined, okay? But like I said, it should be a meaningful name, right? So that when next developer looks at a code, right, it should make sense. It should not be saying display aeroplane in the car class, because it doesn't make sense, right? You're not flying an aeroplane inside a car, right? Unless we're talking about the flying cars, right? So, okay. So let's see if I do system.debug, okay? So I'm gonna do name, system.debug, model number, okay? System.debug, okay? You can put a number of, number of doors, okay? Save it. I'm giving this public because I wanted to access a method. Usually, right, most of the times, right, if you want an object to perform an action, then you have to make that action public. But if you do not want an object to perform an action, right, then you can make it as private, right? For instance, I can define a method here, private, which is used inside this method, right? Okay, I understand that it's confusing. Okay, let's forget it for now. Okay, we'll deal with that later. For now, what I'm trying to do is here, I wanted to display the information, okay? I'm trying to display the information to the user, okay? So because, as I said, these variables are private, I can't expose it, okay? So I can't verify it whether, whatever value I'm passing in here, right? Here, in this case, okay? In a constructor is actually getting passed to this name, model number, or number of floor, okay? The way to verify, you just put audi dot display info, okay? So if this action displays the right value, that means the constructor is working correctly, okay? Means whatever I'm passing here is actually getting assigned to the name, model number, and number of door. But remember one thing, right? So you are defining, so there are two kinds of variable, right? One is a local variable and one is a global variable, okay? So in this case, right, these variables you have defined outside the method, right? You're not putting this variable inside this, okay? So I can put something like this, private string name, okay? So this is what I call as a local variable. Means the scope of this name is only limited to this one, okay? Whereas if you defined a variable outside the method, right, in our case name, you can use name in drive, you can use name in display. As you can see, I've used in display, right? But if you declare a variable, let's say private string color, okay, color of a car, okay? Now I can't access the color in display info because your color is only restricted to drive. Makes no sense, right? Confused? Okay, so we have two kinds of variables. One is a local, one is a global, okay? When you declare a variable inside a method, right? This method. So what does that tell you? You are actually, let me see if it saves or not. All right, just a second. Oh, sorry, my bad. You can't use the private, okay? Right, because it doesn't make no sense, right? Right, so you can actually define a variable inside a method, okay? So when you define a variable, let me extend this boy here. When you define a variable inside a method, right, that variable loses the scope. It's only limited to that method. You can't use color in display. If I use, say, come on, system.debug, okay? If I use color, it will not work because the code will say, what the heck is color? Because you haven't defined color outside the method, right? When you define anything outside the method, right, it becomes global to that specific class, okay? So in this case, I can't define color inside. So that's why you have to keep it in consideration. This concept will get more clear for you as we do more examples in the future, okay? So for now, just think about the scope of the variable, okay? So if you define anything inside the method, right, it will be restricted to that method, okay? If you wanted to define a variable which can be used across different methods, define outside the method, okay? Make it like a global variable or a class variable, in other words, you can say. Class variable, you have to make it as a class variable, which is specific to that class, okay? Right, now let's run this one. There are different terminology, right? I mean, some programming languages use this different way, but just wanted to make a generic term in object-oriented, okay? So you see OD-A44. So that means our constructor is working correctly. So I am defining, so I declared I create an object, okay? And then I passed these 3 values to object because the constructor expects it. And inside the class, I'm just passing the value of this variables to our global variables or class variables, right? Name, model number, and number of door, okay? And then I'm displaying that information. That's all to it. So today we covered classes, right? We talked about objects, okay? And then I explained to you why we need a class, right? Class is a blueprint, okay? Give an example of car. Car is a blueprint, right? Car is a generic term, right? Car can have different properties. Car can have different functionality, right? The different functionality: self-driving, manual driving, okay? Manual driving, I'm talking about where the user drives, okay? And maybe you have a car which can fly, you know, flying cars in the future, okay? So these are the different functionality. Any kind of actions which is performed, right? That you call it as a method, okay? Now, we talked about access specifier, access modifier, whatever you call access, right? So private, we have public, we have global, we have protected, okay? So protected is normally used when we are inheriting from another class. So we're gonna talk about inheritance later, because it's a very important concept. When you are actually going to use because the thing is, you have to use Apex in an object-oriented way, okay? Because it is an object-oriented programming language, and it will defeat the purpose if you're not going to make use of object-oriented principles, right? You have to use the right principles. You have to use the right class and declare the objects in the right way. You have to declare the constructors when you have to. So talking of constructors, we talked about constructors where I have created my own constructor, right? Because initially what I've done, I created a car class, OD equals to new car class, and open and close the brackets, okay? But the requirement is like, I need to pass the value to name, model number, number of door, okay? So the way to do that, you have 2 choices, right? First, use constructor or make it public, okay? So making public is a very bad choice, right? You should not be doing that. So we chose the first one, okay? Right, so that's all I wanted to talk about today, right? So I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. I try to make it as simple as I can. I understand that object-oriented can be challenging if you're new to it, but please stay with me. I try to explain it in a very simple way. As we go along with different chapters, it will become more clear, okay? That being said, you have a great day. Take care.